I have to get it 100%. Oh, there you go. She's got quite a voice. Did you hear her? Recording in progress.
I heard that.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being here with me, Carmen. It's really great to have you.
Yes.
I've really enjoyed getting to know you over the last little while in our chats and everything. One of the things that I was really excited that you told me about, and I'm really excited to have you share, is the song that you've created out of I love the opening prayer to the Cloud of Unknowing. It's just, I know it's part of the traditional liturgy or whatever. I didn't realize that when I first read the Cloud, and I read that prayer and I was like, oh, that's the prayer I want on my lips all the time. And so I think it's amazing that you turned it into a song, because music makes everything better. Yeah, would you be willing to tell us a little about it and share it?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me too, Justin. So one of the reasons that I love the Cloud of Unknowing is because when I first read it in the Middle English, it helped me to meditate as I was reading it. It's very mimetic. And I wanted to make it part of my corpuscles, really, because as we were saying before we hit record, I basically have a very nervous, like I deal with anxiety in my life and have for, decades. And so I wanted to bring in these very healthy words, because I love words. And so I made up this song. It just happened. And I'm going to sing it now. I sang it this morning in the marsh, and it really does bring a sense of calmness to me, and a sense of the immediacy of the presence of mystery of God. And it reminds me really of Simone Weil, who prayed the Lord's Prayer in Greek when she was picking grapes and such in the fields with workers trying to understand their real hardships. So when I sing it, I try to focus on the words and on what they mean, and not anything else. And of course, I don't really quite succeed, but that's not the point, really. I mean, I just try to focus on it and have that sort of centering effect. So it goes like this. God, unto whom alle Härte span unto whom alle wille spaketh, unto whom no private thing is hid. He besageth they so for to cleanse the untent of mine heart with the unspeakable gift of the grace, thought he may perfectly loveth they, and worthily praiseth they. Amen. I just love that.
So do I. That's absolutely beautiful. Thank you.
It's just the unspeakable part of it is really beautiful. And in English, modern English, it goes like this. God, to you all hearts are open, to you all longings speak, and to you no secret thing is hidden. I beg you, purify the intentions of my heart through the unspeakable gift of your grace, so I can love you with all I am and praise you for all you are. Amen. And I love that in the Middle English, grace is grassa, and because I love grass too. And so it has that sort of bonus of like always reminding me of green grass when I sing it. I mean, it doesn't really have anything to do with it, but I just think that beauty and the words, and I just think his wordplay throughout the book is amazing. I have this footnote in the Cloud of Unknowing where he talks about the unspeakable gift of the grace. In other words, the ineffable gift of the grace, where his wordplay is suggesting the mystery of a dialogue between our chatter and a profound silence. I just think Anonymous is like, if he were alive today, he would share just in our sensibilities for the love of words and wordplay. Yeah, the fact that we can have a dialogue with silence, that's pretty much grace, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I was thinking about when you were, before you sang, you were talking about how you use it as a spiritual practice, and that it kind of helps to center and things like that. And I know in my own experience, like the very first time I read the Cloud, I didn't understand it. I had no idea what I just encountered. I knew it was something profound and meaningful, but it was like beyond me, and I put it away. And it took me a year or two to come back to it and really to be able to. I think I had to change in order to come to the text. But one of the things that I find when I try and put into practice the things that the Cloud talks about is that the absolute apophatic silence, that deep wordless silence is really hard to get to. On a practical level, it's really hard to approach. And one of the things that I realized as I was studying the Cloud is that the author fully admits that. And doesn't present it as, this is going to be easy for you, or, you just sit down and be with God. It'll be super simple. And, just don't worry about it and relax into it. That's not the approach he takes at all. And he describes these sort of other spiritual practices, which he only hints at because he's assuming that you're getting them from somewhere else and in your monastic training and whatever. And in my own spiritual practice, I've looked to try and sort of fill in that gap and say, like, well, I wonder how I can expand on these practices he's mentioned so that I can work my way up towards that deep silence that he's describing. And I feel like that kind of singing that might fill that kind of practice, like that sort of intermediary step where you're working towards it. I don't know. Does that resonate with you? Does that kind of make sense?
It's beautiful. I think actually that's so much wisdom and practical truths there, because I know that I have a neighbor who gardens, has a very beautiful small garden around her house. And she said that one of the things she tries to do, because she lives alone, is she doesn't have a TV. And she tries to even get beyond being grateful. It's kind of like, sounds like a little bit what you're talking about. She's a very grateful person. Mm-hmm. But she says, I sometimes try to just sit and just be, which is very similar, I think, to what you're saying. And I said to her, because we sat on her porch last night, and I said, so in other words, to be like a tree. She said, exactly. So I think that the goal, because I love trees, as you can tell, but I think that this notion of oneness, like Julian of Norwich talks about, this, wanting with God, isn't really this, what is the word? It's not this 1% kind of activity for like only the 1%. It's definitely, I think, something we can all experience, flawed as we are and human as we are. And then about the Cloud of Unknowing, what drew me to speak to the difficulty of it, what drew me to the Cloud of Unknowing was the spirit. So I only got a glimpse of it from an anthology when I was in graduate school, but that glimpse had the whole of the spirit in it. And so for some reason, I don't know why, it's not that I didn't think some of the Cloud of Unknowing was difficult, but what I mostly heard in it was this spirit that really drew me to it. And I imagine because I was in great need of its companionship. And it kept calling, even when I forgot about it. It kept really reaching out, I guess, is how we would put it today. Thanks for reaching out. It kept reaching out sort of invisibly. I have a friend who's 84. And she said to me, I've never gotten around to reading that Cloud that you translate. I said, well, that's okay, And then she said, no, she said, I'm determined to read it. She said, and then she started reading it. She said, I've just given my permission not to understand parts of it. I said, that sounds good to me. She said, but it's not as hard. It's not as bad. No, she didn't say hard. She said, it's not as bad as I thought it would be, and she's a person of great faith. She's somebody I learn a lot about on how to love others and how to live a kind life. And so I think there are many different moving parts of the Cloud of Unknowing. There's the intellectual part, because obviously the Cloud author Anonymous, who I feel is one of our ancestors, right? He talks about atoms, and he's a really bright individual. So there's the intellectual part. And then there's this embodied part of he's lived it. He's a teacher. He's engaged with students in ways where he understands how to get out of the way. But I just think above all, there's something magical with the root of being power, of magic, right? Might, magic. There's something at the root of it that he is able to use the Middle English language to convey this spirit. So I think all of the emotions that you express, of it being difficult, it being that we have to change in order to understand it. I will just admit this. I was drawn to the Cloud of Unknowing because I had difficulties in my life, just me, with myself, that I knew if I brought myself and my difficulties in contact with, up against, almost like a boat against a rock, I knew that if I brought myself up to the cloud, that it would change me. And it did. And I'm not saying, that it's a one-time change. I don't know anybody who thinks change is a one-time thing, but it's really saved my life. And I think our lives need saving many times, if I'm honest, but it really changed my life. So I actually have a very similar experience with you of the cloud. It's a very awkward in some ways experience, and at the same time very graceful. It's unique. It's real. I will say this one thing though, it's hard to explain, but very real. Wouldn't you say that? It's very real, but hard to put into words.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely real is a good word for it. I feel like the author, the fact that he is experienced in the contemplative practice just shines through in a way that sometimes doesn't. I love philosophy and theology and all that stuff. But sometimes you read those guys and while they have these brilliant ideas and beautiful imagery and all that kind of stuff, sometimes you wonder, it's like, how much of this have you put into practice? How much have you really sat down and really looked at implementing? With the ancients and moderns and anybody, and myself, I'm sure I'm guilty of that too. But with the author of the Cloud, he really he obviously speaks from experience and some kind of grace that God has given him. And you mentioned that he's really smart, learned guy. And I think that one of the really cool dynamics that I love with the author is that, on the one hand, he undoubtedly was, right? Like you can go through and you can read, and like if you read the commentaries that I've read and stuff like that, some of the commentaries I've read talk about, all the different sources he's read, and he's reading Dionysius, and he's working with the school of the Victorines, and, all this heavy philosophy that he's deeply engaged in. But somehow he manages to take all of that and turn it into something that's, even though it's difficult, and not to say that it's easy, but he expresses it in a way that is approachable and practical and useful and simple, even though it's, he's starting from this huge philosophical, this deep place. And I long to emulate that in my own writing, in my own life.
That's such a good point. That is such a good point, because that's actually, Justin, one of the things I love most about him is how he is a teacher's teacher. Like he does have this, he's like a mountain of learning. And then he presents the tip of that, the very best of that to the student, to us in the audience. And he makes it, he synthesizes everything. And then, like you said, he adds that experiential, like he's done it, he does it. And to me, reading the text in Middle English is meditating. And so one of the things I tried to do in the translation is make it a similarly mimetic experience. If you just read it and sort of saturate and steep in it and go forward. because he is somebody who's very aware of etymologies of words too. So when he uses the word naked, ontent, the ontent for like naked, like a simple naked intention. I just think intention, we sometimes have, you know, the road is to somewhere is paved with good intentions. But the thing to me is intention is a beautiful word. It's related to tendon, and tendons help things stretch. And attention is to stretch towards someone. And to be content is to stretch within oneself. And, you know, in French, you have the word for conversation. It means to actually stretch with others, like, you know, between others in talking. And intention is like stretching within. I just love it to have a naked intent. So I think you're right. He has this wonderfully philosophical, he's a philosopher, but he's not at all only abstract. And I also like that he's a bit crotchety. I mean, I think I've really changed my thinking in some ways, because I was so focused on translating, like understanding who he was, and getting into the every word, because I really did look up pretty much every word. I'm pretty, I needed to feel every word in my fingers or mind or something like that of both the Book of Privy Council and also the Cloud of Unknowing. And I really think he was probably writing a woman, a student who was, but we don't really know for sure. The main thing is it was a student. That's the main important thing. But I think his sort of a little bit of a crotchety, but very kind-hearted nature endears him to me. You know, the way a typo does in an email from somebody at work.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make me think less of them. It just makes me think, wow, they're human. And when I do it, of course, I'm mortified. I did a email recently to someone and signed it "Beat Carmen," and I meant best Carmen. And you know, but he's just like, when he starts it out about the janglers, what is that at the very beginning? I had the hardest time. You know, the very beginning.
The gossipers and
yeah, at the very
doesn't want the
beginning.
book to fall into the hands of gossipers.
Yeah, that bit at the very beginning. And he just had, okay, so he says, where he says, I have it up on my screen, like I told you. Yeah. He says, however, I really don't want habitual gossips, brown nosers, fault finders, complainers, whisperers, and all kinds of character assassinators reading this book. I hope they never see it. I never intended to write anything for them. I don't even want them hearing about it. That also goes for those who are just inquisitive, both educated and not. Yes, I mean, even if they are good people living active lives, it's not for the merely curious. I mean, he's just himself. You know, I have hoped to become more like him in many ways, because he's definitely himself, unapologetically who he is, and kind-hearted, but just like, here I am. There's a lot to be recommended for that. And in the Middle English, it's a very sort of very textually very interesting passage, the way it sounds in Middle English. So I just love it. He's definitely somebody I would love. You know how sometimes you encounter authors and you think, I really appreciate what you've written, but I'm not so sure I would want to set aside time to have tea with you. But with Anonymous, if Anonymous rang me up and said, Carmen, tea today, 2:00, I would move my entire, you know, I would call people up and say, I can't meet with you. I'd say to students, can we please have a conference at another time? I've got to go meet with Anonymous for tea. I would love to have tea with Anonymous. I'm sure it wouldn't be anything like I expect. Like, he's not the kind of person you can predict what he would say. Exactly. I would just love to meet. I would love to have tea with him. Wouldn't you? I mean, yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. Most definitely. Yeah. Yeah. If I could sit on a bench for an hour and talk to him, I would jump on that. Yeah. And I love the way he, I know it's funny when you read commentaries on the Cloud, some people seem to think he had this anti-intellectual tendency. Because he does periodically say, like, oh, the wisdom of the philosophers, they don't understand this, and that kind of stuff. I think he walked in this really non-dual kind of way with his approach to it, because like we said, he was obviously very well read in philosophy.
Yeah.
A lot of his ideas aren't originally his. He expresses them super well, but and any good philosopher is of course drawing from the tradition. And yet he seems to have this almost like anti-intellectualist kind of bent that a lot of people pick up on. And I feel like it's a really interesting commentary for today. I know in myself, while I love the philosophy and the theology and stuff, I find that it's in our modern world, we want to separate everything. And so we've separated philosophy from spiritual practice, and we've made them into two different camps. And you've got people who do spiritual practice over here, and you've got people who do philosophy over there. And I think maybe the author of the Cloud, and I'm not a scholar on the history of it, but it kind of seems like maybe at that point in history when he was around was when scholasticism was really starting to take off, and philosophy had sort of become, up until him, all these people he quotes like Dionysius and the Victorines and all that, they were ascetic monks living intensely spiritual lives. They were meditating all the time as they were writing their philosophy. And it started to get sort of taken away from that. And I almost feel like he sort of critiques that a little bit. And that's where it's not like he's anti-intellectual, but just that he's maybe anti-intellectual without spirituality to go along with it. Like he sees that separation as being dangerous, and sort of, I don't know, did that make any sense? I don't know all those things as facts. Those are all just things I wonder.
No, that's really, though, that makes really good sense, because I think your emphasis on the fact that I think it's both and. He is definitely a philosopher, although that's probably not what people would think of him first. They might say a theologian or, religious person, but he's definitely a philosopher. Yes. And especially in that classic sense of a philosopher as someone who lives as they think, and they think well. So the thinking has to do with living well and being close to God. And of course, that would include kindness and all kinds of things, right? All the good stuff of being human that's good. And in his mind, there would be no divorce between thinking, doing, loving, feeling. There's just no personhood. It's non-dual. And it's so non-dual that we would say it's beyond dualistic. It's not even like, it doesn't fall into easy categories that our minds have grown to be a little bit accustomed to, right? But that really, I'm not certain that when we walk through a marsh or listen to the silence, I'm not sure we find those as naturally there. They're more like we've learned them and we can unlearn them. So I love the fact that one of my favorite translations of the Cloud is Ira Pogroff's, P-O, Groff. And Cynthia Bourgeault, I know, talks a lot about the non-dualistic aspects of the Cloud, and so does Ira Pogroff. I mean, I've read everything he's ever written, and he's amazing. The way he talks about prayer and the way he relates it to psychology, a little bit like, say, Anne Ulanov does in her primary speech. And I love the fact of thinking about it beyond dualism and really more our natural, like the childlikeness in us, where philosophy, of course, would be part of everything else. It seems somehow there's this pull towards, let me sell you something. And the pull towards, let me sell you something, really prefers to have categories. And somewhere else in life is that place where everything is, you don't tease it apart. It's just all part of one thing. So I definitely think, I know I was just reading the other day, I have a friend who is taking Cynthia Bourgeault's course on the Cloud of Unknowing. And she sent me this on Facebook, because we have this wonderful, I know you have the wonderful ministry, New Eden Ministry, on Facebook. And she sent me this message on Facebook saying, I'm still taking, I brought it up so I could share it. I'm still taking Cynthia Bourgeault's course on the Cloud. And her discussion this morning led me into remembering God is in the milking, God is in the sowing, God is in the kindling of the fire. So Philosophy, I think we could say, is in the milking. Philosophy is in the sowing. Philosophy is in the kindling of the fire. Because it really is, like, I have students, and these are difficult days for students and for teachers, for ministers, for spiritual leaders, for human beings, for essential workers, difficult days. And I think my students really don't care what I think if I can't try to live it. I mean, it really doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah.
So it's got to be of a piece, and making it of a piece is, because I've often thought you really can tell a lot about somebody when something is interrupted. So, for example, if somebody interrupts my class, how I handle that is really more who I am as a teacher than maybe necessarily my great planning of going in and let's do this class. Especially if it's an interruption that's a bit like, this doesn't work for me, like we're doing something and how dare, And so I just really think my goal anyway is, how can I become a kinder person through singing this song or translating this book or having this book translate me, because there's wisdom in it that I really don't understand, right? So I agree what you're saying about the non-dualism. And I don't have, what's the word? I've read a lot about scholasticism, and there's that quote about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. And I know that's sort of not really a true quote, although it has some truth to it. But whenever I hear people talking about philosophy, which I absolutely love philosophy because I love wisdom, right? The love of wisdom. I always think that it should be connected to actually helping people. So, like, for example, if I hear people talking about philosophy, my first thought always goes to, how much are essential workers making? Can they live off their salary? And if a conversation doesn't have much to do with how can we all become more like kinder, and the kindness actually mean how can people have better lives, then I just, my mind goes in that direction every time. How do we make the world better for people? I mean, there's poverty, so systemic poverty. There is, unkindness in the form of racism. How do I contribute to that in some small way to making it better? So that's where philosophy to me is beyond dualistic. In other words, how can we think better? Because I know in the past, I've had many times in my life when I was younger, and even, now, where my thinking wasn't right. Like I didn't understand.
Yep.
Like I really was ignorant. And I don't mean ignorant as in the way we use it to criticize someone or to cast aspersions, but I mean, I was ignorant in the sense of not knowing something. And, it's like almost the healing of the mind. Like, how can I think better to be a kinder person? So that's why I think philosophy is of a piece with everything else. And so the way you're describing it lands perfectly well in my heart. Yeah. And thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. I mean, thank you. I agree so very much. I mean, I look at the world, I've experienced some of it myself, and the rest of it I've seen just on the news or whatever, but it's a very broken thing that we have, this human society. There's beauty in it, there's goodness in it, of course, because there is that non-dual aspect where it's never one or the other, but there's certainly an abundance of sin, to use the language that the author of the Cloud would use. And I've thought in my own life, like how do we address this? And actually my own ministry and my own teaching and my own love of philosophy is grounded in that, because I think that, as much as we can have and do need to have conversations around social theory and, how we run the economy and all that kind of stuff, I think the biggest obstacle to a true world of justice that we face right now is, the condition of the human heart. And that, we have the technology, we have the science, we have, all that stuff's good and important, and we have it. And we have amazing technology and science now that we could live in utopia if we all just wanted to care for each other and be
Yeah.
humble and share, those good kindergarten things that we don't seem to learn after kindergarten for some reason about sharing. It matters in kindergarten when you have blocks, but it doesn't matter when you're a CEO with a big company for some reason.
Right.
And so I think you're absolutely right that the philosophy or theology and spiritual practice and all of those things together, because I don't think they should be separated from one another, are what we need. We need to start healing hearts somehow. And I think that the Cloud has a beautiful insight into that. It makes me think, and we were going to talk about it anyway, so maybe I'll segue into that. I think it's chapter 46 and 47 around in there, where the author of the Cloud suggests the spiritual practice, which basically, I don't think he uses the exact words hide and seek, but he's talking about playing hide and seek with God.
Right.
And I love that there's one line in there, and maybe you can read it from your translation if you don't mind. I can't remember exactly how he says it, but he says, if you think that this is foolish, understand that it is. And I want you to do it because I want you to be a fool, basically, is what he's saying. You need to learn to let go of some of this pious curmudgeonry, is something one of the old Celtic rules calls it, this pious curmudgeonry. And I think that as a lot of spiritual people, we really want to protect what's sacred, and that's a good thing, to have this reverence and this kind of devout seriousness around our spiritual practice. That can be a good thing, and there's a place for that. But I think what we really need is this playfulness that he's describing in this. I think it's just this willingness to let the deep, profound spiritual truths also be fun and silly. Also breaks down some of those barriers that. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling now, but I don't know if you have anything.
No, it makes perfect. I love the fact that you're talking about playfulness, because to me, one of his emphases in those two chapters 46 and 47, is not to make it about the fragile ego. I'm not talking about the good ego, the healthy ego, but not to make it about do I look good? Did I do it right? How am I doing? And I actually put it in a footnote because, I love footnotes. And it says, in this chapter and the next, the diction and description suggest a game of hide and seek between parent and child. So like God and us, which ends with the parent finding the child and covering them with kisses and hugs. And then this is a recurring image, right? Through, like in the Ankrana Rula and others. In that one, he says, our Lord playeth with us as the mother with her young darling, or, as the mother with her young darling. And then in another Ankrana Rula passage, it describes a hide and seek game where God, our mother, hides. The child cries out, mother, mother, and God jumps up and out with open arms. And it says, kluppeth and kusseth and wipeth, hugs and kisses and wipes our eyes. And uses the image to describe the experience of how God sometimes withdraws or hides grace from us for a time before returning to find us. And the thing I love about it is sometimes I think we try to be conscientious about spirituality, like, in other words, approach it like a class, which is a human thing, right? I think we all have that experience at some point, or at some points. It's an ongoing human condition. And he says in chapter 46 at the end, right where you were talking about it, he says, never lunge for God's will. Never lunge for God's will like a hungry dog, even if you're starving. Don't be a greedy greyhound. Don't grab. Let me suggest how you can do this. I'm going to advise you to play a sort of game with God, seriously. Pretend you don't want what you want as much as you want it. When you feel that beast desire stirring inside you with tremendous power, restrain it. Act as if you don't want God to find out how much you long to see him, know him, and feel him. Hide all that. Perhaps, and this is exactly what you were saying, perhaps I sound like a child making up a game, but I mean it. I'm confident that anyone with the grace to put my advice into practice will eventually experience the joy of God's playfulness. God will come to you the way an earthly father plays with his child, kissing and hugging, making everything all right. That's just beautiful, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful. Yeah. And I think there's like a kind of a psychological, spiritual insight in it as well. Because I've tried to put this to practice it sometimes, and he's right. It feels silly, and you feel like, what am I doing? Right. Which is a humbling experience, which of course is a good thing. But I think there's also, in my own reflection on the process, of my own practice of it, and also of the author's writing of it, I think of it kind of like, I mentioned at the beginning that sometimes that deep, empty silence is so hard to approach, and how there's these kind of intermediary steps. And I feel like this is a really good practice for sort of like preparing us for that work, because the act of having to try and gather up my desire for God, as if it were some kind of substance, as if it was something that I could like hold in my hand and then hide it somewhere where God isn't going to find it. I think it's like an exercise of the spiritual senses. And so a lot of I can't remember if the author of the Clouds uses the term spiritual senses or not, but Ari Yujna does a lot, who I also love, and who's kind of in the same school of thought. And so there's this idea that we have these interior senses, and some of them we can kind of name and define, but some of them are kind of ineffable and hard to pin down. And so I use the analogy sometimes when I'm talking about this practice with people I do spiritual direction with and stuff, about how, if you have, like, let's say you have some kind of injury and you can't use your arm for a couple of years, and then you get some kind of miraculous medical healing, and it works, but you don't know how to use the muscles yet. You kind of lose the muscle memory.
Yeah.
You can't explain to someone, how do you use your arm? You can't say, well, okay, so just, press X, Y, Z, and here's the buttons, and you flip the lever and your arm will go up. It's just this kind of intuitive thing that we have to just do, and there's no way to explain it. And so you might toss somebody a ball. You might just sort of like throw a tennis ball at them, and out of instinct, they'll just kind of catch it. And I think this practice is kind of like that, in a sense that there's no way to explain how to use your inner senses, these spiritual senses. You just have to be kind of, someone has to toss you a ball, and you have to just sort of catch it out of instinct. And this process, I think, kind of works sort of like that, at least in my experience for myself, where it's really easy, it's beautiful to read about, gathering up my desire and hiding it somewhere where God can't find it. But when you actually go to do it, you're like, how on earth, what does that mean? Right? Like, how do I do this? But in the struggling with it, I find it's almost like a physiotherapy kind of thing, where those spiritual senses start to kind of, you gain back that muscle memory, and you start to realize, like, oh, I can feel my desire, and I can put it here and I can put it there. And it sort of like exercises the spiritual faculties in a way.
That is so good. No, that is like really good. The idea of comparing it to, like, somebody throws you a ball and how do you learn that? Right. I think that in one of the chapters, I just know it's on page 83, like, how he talks about how to handle our thoughts, where he says you can kind of duck down and let them go by. And he really does personify thoughts, which I appreciate, because at different points in my life, my thoughts were very much overwhelming and very personal, like they were me, and very overwhelming is just the best way I can put it. And he talks about, like sort of kneeling down, like, and letting them go past you. And then he says, there are other strategies, but I won't go into them right now. And you can just tell he's talking to a student. Because when by grace you try these to improve their worth, I believe you'll have more to teach me then than I could ever teach you. I say that because although everything I've said about these spiritual techniques is true, I myself am far from having mastered them. So I ask you, help me by being diligent in these contemplative stratagems, because the more you learn, the more you can teach me. Now that's a real teacher, I think. Then he goes, and this is like when you're talking about what do we do? How do we catch that ball? How do we learn to build up this muscle? Because I really think contemplation is very much muscle memory, like of having this habit. I mean, Brother Lawrence talks about that, right? Mm-hmm. Keep on trying. That's it. Keep on trying. I mean, I'm laughing only because, that's so not just it. But anyway, keep on trying. Work hard and stick with it. I'm asking you to do this. Humbly accept the pain if the going gets tough and nothing happens quickly. Look on this work as your purgatory. Later, when the initial rough patch is over and your pain subsides, you'll sense that God has become your teacher, and that by his grace, these contemplative techniques have become second nature to you. And at that point, I have no doubt you will be cleansed, not only of your sin, but also of its pain. And then he goes on and says, but don't turn back and don't give up and don't give in to a fear of failing. That's just beautiful, isn't it? But don't turn back and don't give up and don't give in to a fear of failing. And I think community helps us to not turn back and not give up and not give in to a fear of failing. I mean, how many times has a friend reached out and kept me going, or a family member? So I think it's very much a community. It's very much an individual exercising of this muscle, and very much requires community also. So both and again. And it's one reason that I do love, speaking of his friend, across the centuries over in France, Brother Lawrence, because he says very similar things. Yeah, it's a habit.
All right. Well, was there anything else you wanted to add? I mean, we could talk about the cloud for a few weeks, I'm sure. But,
I'm sure we could, at least a couple. No, thank you, Justin. It's been such a good conversation. I feel really honored, and it's a real joy to get to talk with you, because you've thought about these things and also experienced them and lived them in such a real way. And I want to thank you for that. It helps me in a lot of ways. So thanks, Justin.
Well, you're welcome. And I very much appreciate everything you bring. I mean, you've obviously done a deep engagement with the text too. I feel like it called out to both of us. I feel sort of a kinship in there that the text called out to me. And when you said that the other day when we were talking, I thought, wow, I feel like a kinship with you there. So yeah, thank you so much, Carmen.
Thanks, Justin.